Welcome to Elevating La Cultura podcast, a space where I talk with Latinas who are passionate about what they do and willing to share their wisdom with others to change the narrative, especially for the next generation. Each season is centered around different topics, but all with a Latina perspective. This is season 2, focused on health and wellness. So vámonos, and let's get into it. Hola, it's a new month and a new quarter. I hope everyone is feeling great about the rest of the year. Today, I'm talking with Vanessa from Holistic Healing Circle, a brand she created to encourage and empower anyone who comes across her page or her products. Like many of us, she created this space during the pandemic when she needed something to ground herself and pour into her mental well-being. During this interview, we also talk about her day job where she works as a domestic violence advocate. So please be aware that we're talking through some hard issues as you listen. Resources will be shared at the end. Please enjoy this episode with Vanessa. Hi, I am so excited to introduce my next guest. We met online. And we met through social media. I don't know how exactly I found your Instagram, but I was just so connected with the content that you were putting out there that I reached out. And so I'm so glad that you said yes to doing an episode with me. And so I get to introduce Vanessa from Holistic Healing Circle to the podcast listeners. And I'm so excited for our conversation. I know that when we talked in person a few weeks ago, we're talking for an hour and the conversation just flowed. It was so good. And so I'm excited to bring the conversation to everyone else. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for that intro, by the way. So, yes, my name is Vanessa. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the owner of Holistic Healing Circle. So, it started off, it's my little candle company that I treasure, honestly, because it's something that was begun during COVID. So, it was like most of us, it was during our time where we did a lot of self reflection. And I definitely had to do a lot of self reflection and I had nothing to dive myself into during COVID when there was a lot of instability in terms of everything going on around, something that was out of my control. And that's something that I've always kind of struggled with, was like managing those emotions when things are out of my control. And so I knew about crystals and I knew about certain things that I have on my website for a while, but it wasn't until COVID when life was really like, no, sit down, take time and think, um, to just fully dive into everything and also find space for myself to devote myself and have a place to heal for myself. And I was able to bring a lot out from that and share with family members and friends. And so I received a lot of encouragement during that time to open something up and to move forward with that little project that I had in my brain and to make something bigger out of it. And so that's how Holistic Healing Circle kind of came across during those raw emotions that I felt during COVID, with anxiety, with not having something to dive into. And so that is how Holistic Healing Circle kind of came out. I wanted it to be a platform where people could go into the social media page and look at things and find some type of thing that they were able to grasp onto and dive into for themselves. Whether it was crystals, whether it was candles, whether it was the aromatherapy of the scents, or the little pages, the little Instagram snippets that I share with mindfulness or a positive affirmation. So there's a little bit of something for everyone on there, and I'm hoping that people truly can grasp onto any little thing and just kind of go from there.
Yes, I think that's how I was drawn to your page because of the positive affirmations that you were posting, and like the like everything was just so welcoming and like peaceful. Like whenever I would scroll past like a post that you posted, i I like I honestly like took a minute to like read it, and I think I reposted a few of your um posts, and then I was like, wow, I am like really connecting to this person's Instagram and what they're putting out there. And that's when I decided to reach out, because I was like, I need to learn more about the business and like what you're doing and what you're about. But I think it's so relatable that like 2020 like changed all of us, and we had to stop and be quiet and sit still, and we had no choice but to reflect, and we had no choice but to be bored. And I think a lot of creativity came out of that as well, like even though like it was a hard year, but
Mhm.
like with me, like I launched this podcast because of like I had downtime, and so I had time to work on this. And um I've heard it's been like a pattern throughout my conversations that like a lot was born out of 2020 and the time that we had to sit
Mhm.
during the pandemic when we couldn't do anything.
I definitely resonate with the trying to be welcoming my page. Honestly, I am creating this page for anyone to just dive into whatever it is that they want to kind of receive from that page, have that holistic approach. And during COVID, I did notice that there was a lot of just so much going on in the social media world where I needed to gravitate towards something that was grounding me and something that was positive for my emotional self and my mental health, honestly. And so I wanted to be like one of those pages that definitely just strove for that positiveness, the welcomeness, the peace, the encouragement that we definitely all needed. And so I definitely resonate with like the fact that it was an approach that I wanted to take not only for myself but for everyone who followed me to feel safe in that space that I've created.
I think it's definitely what people need, and like they needed back then and they still need now. And I love the like I'm always like I gravitate towards like positivity and positive affirmations, but I gravitate more so when it's um, someone posting who is Latinx or a person of color. I just resonate that much deeper with them and what they're posting. I don't know, probably because I feel that connection that they somewhat understand the cultural aspect of our past, our collective past, and that affirmation goes that much deeper.
I definitely agree. It's something that I've from where I guess originally started my career, which I'm also a domestic violence advocate. And that's a little fun fact that I've only think I've said like once on my page, but I am a domestic violence advocate. And so I do work with a lot of generally women who are from this background of being a Latina. And I've there's just a lot of healing and a lot of different ways in which the women decide to move forward. And there are many different ways to do so. And so it's something that I've noticed as I've worked in this field, and I've worked in the field for about 3 years now, that we need to start sharing these different types of approaches to moving forward, to dealing with trauma, um, because we definitely need it to grow, to get out of our stepping stone and out of our comfort zone too, which I feel like definitely held me back a lot during the past, was just being in my head a lot and second guessing myself. Um, and so just putting that first foot forward is where what I needed to kind of give myself that push and to help not only my community, but also the field that I'm specializing in. So a lot of what I do too is psychoeducational um, counseling, I guess you would say. So it's a lot of educating on domestic violence, and with that, I mean, we can focus on so many broad topics within domestic violence, but also a lot of that is just being mindful about what happened and moving forward so that cycle breaks and so it doesn't continue, because I think that's very important when we're talking about domestic violence, that it's a very scary situation, and it's also something that we want to be able to put an end to. And so by educating, by putting all of this resources out there, I think we can strive for a better future. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a little snippet, and I've definitely been wanting to implement more and kind of share a little bit more about my field and also my career, my full-time job, because that is a part of me and it's a part that I love and I love to advocate for. So I've I will definitely talk a little bit more about that in the future for sure.
Yes, I think it's really important for us to have these conversations because they're not easy topics to talk about, but if we don't talk about them, then nothing's going to change. You said you got into your field about 3 years ago, or you've been a domestic violence advocate for 3 years. What got you into that specific field?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely from the get-go, from when I started diving into psychology and learning about just the mind, learning about our behavior, I always had this little thing inside of me where I said I wanted to help women in any kind of way that I could. And so my first stepping stone was actually interning for a um, women's AIDS. It was called Women's AIDS Project. So I was mainly focusing on helping the people who were affected by AIDS, by holding support groups, by doing case management. And then after that, I actually found out that a lot of the women who experience this HIV and AIDS, um, they also experience domestic violence. And so that's when that door opened, because I was like, there's a correlation there. And I wanted to learn more. And I've always been the type to just, if I see something and I want to kind of devote myself to it, or I want to just open up that door and just gain more information, I kind of just go for it. Um, I do sometimes kind of second but guess myself, but if I put my mind to it, I usually can kind of go forward with it. So I saw that, and it opened up a door where I did not know the resources that were out there for domestic violence. Um, but when I did, I started off working in a shelter, helping out survivors of domestic violence. And from the shelter, I kind of moved to almost a counseling um, type of session and atmosphere where it's more one on one, but we also do groups. And so I've noticed that during my time there, a lot of people that needed our resources were Latinx, and it was a huge majority of the population. And I just started noticing that there needed to be a lot of healing and education. And because I tell a lot of people, unfortunately, domestic violence and things about, power and control and how it can be manifested in a relationship isn't necessarily talked about that often. And like you said, it is something that's scary to open up about, and a person definitely has to be willing to share, and it's a very vulnerable position. But once they do, it just kind of starts spilling out on a lot of different ways in which the Latinx culture um, has been affected by this domestic violence. And so a lot of it also has to do with like the machismo that is deeply rooted in our culture. So having to unpack a lot of that and the cycles that have been going on through generations, and something that has been accepted in a way where we kind of have been brushing it under the rug, is really hard to just start unpacking. And that's why I strive to advocate for a lot of my survivors, their mental health and therapy, because that's another thing too that during this pandemic, and when I started this when this pandemic started, and these raw emotions that I was talking about earlier began, I reflected and I was like, wait, I need to also take care of myself and begin this therapy process that I've been postponing. Um, and there really has been no excuse, because of the fact that I was fortunate enough and privileged enough to have this health insurance to be able to cover um, therapy. And that's a barrier that a lot of people struggle with. So I've been able to advocate for a lot of my survivors, like I said, um, going back to that, and advocate for them to seek therapy services and link them to resources that I know of, um, because it's important. I mean, like I said, this is a lot of generational trauma that needs to be unpacked. Um, that for ages I feel like has was normalized, and now during our generation, we're starting to realize, hey, this type of behavior actually impacts, ourselves, impacts our children, impacts the way that we're raising them, in the way that they go out in society and also look for that attention or see that specific type of thing. So everything in a way is like correlated. And so I just definitely wanted to help in that area, and I've always been wanting to fully devote myself in that way. So I guess in a way, the domestic violence advocacy role that I am in full time um, has a little bit of like that holistic approach as well.
I am so glad that you brought up the topic of machismo because it is a very real thing in the Latinx community. And I think, like, I did not hear that word until recently, till I was an adult. And I was like, what exactly is this? And I didn't realize that I experienced that from people around me or that I witnessed that because it was so normalized. Like these gendered um, roles uh, were so normal in my upbringing. Like I had expectations as a female, and there were expectations for the males. And um, now that I have children, I can, and I have a daughter and I have a son. So I am being that much more intentional about breaking those cycles for my family, um, understanding what that is, where it has come from culturally and like been passed down generationally, and making the conscious decision to one, learn about it, and two, figure out how to shift that narrative for my own family. And I think this is a conversation that really needs to be talked about more, um, brought to light, because like as I'm talking to other people, specifically like the people that are around my age, the millennial age, like we are the ones that are realizing that this is if this continues, if these ideals continue, um, like the ideas of machismo or like the anti-therapy mindset, like it's going to be detrimental for the next generation, and nothing is going to change if we don't speak up, stand up for it, and start normalizing that therapy is okay, that more people than we actually know go to therapy. Um, I think even with this season of the podcast, I want to one normalize talking about therapy, but also um, offer the resources and the conversation starters so that people who do listen can start thinking about it and maybe talking to their friends or their partners or their family about these topics and get the conversation started, even if there's some opposition. Because I know that has been opposition or like not wanting to hear about certain things from my family, but that shouldn't be a deterrent for people to like not talk about it. Um, so I think that like I'm glad that we are having this conversation and that you are talking, and you had said that you want to be more transparent about what you do and how it's important to provide the resources and provide the conversations around these hard topics. Why do you think caring or valuing or prioritizing mental well-being in a holistic way, like the way that you are trying to advocate for, is so important, especially in the Latinx community? And like, how can we then start thinking about it if we have never thought about it before?
So yes, that's a great question. So I think it's extremely important because of the fact that we need to dive into a lot of different ways to help move us forward. And a lot of these ways have been here for forever and have been ingrained, and things that have existed for years and that probably our ancestors have also used. And so with everything, with all the ages and all the colonialism that happened and all of that, it has been buried, and I feel like it's time for us to kind of deep dive into these things that we've had done before and had used before, especially in the Latinx culture. Um, and it's important because we have a lot of unpacking to do for sure. I'm a first generation Latina. My parents are from Mexico, and them having to come to the US and having to switch everything around and just try to move forward in this American society where everything is very heavy surrounding capitalism, and having to quote unquote assimilate and put me and my sisters in school. I think it's very important to acknowledge that there is a lot to unpack and a lot of emotional trauma that we probably and complex trauma that we probably went through. And even for myself, like I still haven't unpacked it fully, right? But I think it starts somewhere. And I think that's why it's important to start now. And it honestly are taking little baby steps to fully understand and to start that process somewhere along the path. And I have my page so that way people also can also like ask me any questions that they may need. For example, the crystals. Whenever I have any pop-ups, people are always asking me about the crystals and if they have started that they just started kind of diving into it. And so they're asking me, well, I don't really know where and kind of what crystal to start off with. And I love when people ask me these questions because I think it's okay to say that you don't know yet and that you are starting your journey, because there should be no shame in that. And I feel like normalizing that the journey is starting and taking those baby steps is extremely huge and says a lot about someone and the importance behind you wanting to take care of yourself and to be better emotionally and be in a better headspace for yourself is amazing. So I do encourage everyone to just start small and start asking questions. No one has the handbook to life, and no one is going to give it to you randomly and say, here are things about life. Like, no one has that ever. And so I always say, like, no matter if you're 30 years old, if you're 50 years old, 70 years old, there's still so much to learn about life and about us humans. Um, and so, yeah, that's why I think it's just important to take that first step, you know?
Yes, I think it's the first step that is the scariest, and but it's crucial to the whole rest of the journey. Like, you just start somewhere. Um, and it could just be, like you said, sending a DM and asking a question, or following a specific page that is putting positivity out there in the world and starting to think about these topics differently. I think in the past year, there have been a lot, because we had a lot of downtime, people were very vocal on social media. And I think a lot of um, new ideals and mindset shifts have happened because of the conversations that have been happening on social media. And even though social media can be like too much, you need to know when to set boundaries between the time that you spend on your phone scrolling and the time that you actually take to process what you're taking in and reading about, and start changing your actual life and the actions that you're taking in your actual life. Like with social media, because it's out and it's public, there can be that fine line between like performative actions that happen on social media. And so I really want to encourage people that, like, if you're just scrolling, like, be conscious of who the voices that you're listening to, and if they're actually uplifting you, or if they're not, like, pouring into you. And once you start making that, like, those connections that you might need to shift your mindset, the next step is to actually take action. Because, like, you can repost all day, but if in your actual life you're not living out what you're posting about, or not taking time to think through how to shift, then that's not going to be doing much either for the next generation, because our kids are watching us. Like, the next generation is watching to see what we're doing. And like you said, we need to be the ones to start making the changes, to start asking the questions, um, and being that bridge between our parents' generation and the next one. Um, and doing that healing work in ourselves and
Mhm.
exploring what that even means. There's like so much to unpack, and I feel like even in this season of the podcast, like, I have just started like having these conversations, but we can, like, always be going deeper and doing the work in our own lives. Um, but I'd love to know more about, like, your products, and like why you choose to make the products that you do, and like what is the meaning behind what you offer.
Yeah, of course. So, my products, I first started off with candles, and that is because the first thing that I think about when I have my sacred space and decorating my sacred space is having a candle there and illuminating it, right? That's like the light that is shining. And I've always said, don't let anyone take away your light. Don't dim it. keep thriving, keep shining on. And so that's why I just wanted to devote myself to candles first. And with my candles, I wanted to create an intention behind each candle that I'm putting out. And each candle has a different intention that you can read on my website. Um, so I have like the Bellatrix one, which is supposed to be empowering, and it's which is contrary to the name, because the name, people whenever they think of Bellatrix, they think, "Oh my gosh, it's Harry Potter. It was the bad girl, the one that like was evil." Um, but it's actually, the meaning behind that name is like an empowering woman in every way, someone that is strong. And so that is what I wanted to resemble when I created that candle. And so my teacup vessels are all different, and I love to have a more eco-friendly approach. So all of my things that you have, or that I have on my website, you can essentially reuse. Um, And so the vessel itself, like the teacup itself, is always going to be changing. But I choose them with the mindset of what the intention is when I put that candle in there. So, for example, like I'm kind of sharing, the Bellatrix one is a more pink reddish hue, and it has glitter and it has gold flakes. And so it just reminds me of someone that is reigning, a queen. And that is definitely what I had in mindset when I created that candle. And I have other ones too. Like I have C's, which has that cinnamon, and people always say it smells like horchata, which it does, or like rice pudding. Um, and so when I created this candle, I wanted this candle to resemble like our home and our just nostalgic memories from childhood and growing up. So each candle that I have is set out for a different intention. Um, I'm starting to also sell crystals and have crystals, and that's another form of healing as well, because each crystal has a different vibration frequency. And when you think about it, people are like, well, it's just a rock. And I'm like, no, it's a crystal. Like we're all made up of different atoms and that are constantly vibrating. And so each mineral and chemical composition of each crystal is reflecting that within our body and giving us that vibrational frequency. Um, and so when I started this journey, I first dove into rose quartz, which is the one that I usually recommend to everyone, because that's such a loving crystal, and it promotes so much self-love within yourself and forgiveness. And it essentially is all about you, and it's putting that intention within you to move forward, to uplift yourself, to gain that confidence. And so that's why I always kind of promote um, rose quartz. And now I'm seeing such a huge shift to the holistic approach and diving into these different um, things like crystals and candles. And I love that because it is something to have. And people are like, well, it's once again, they say it's just a crystal. And I'm like, well, yes, it's a crystal, but once again, this shows how strong your mind is, that you're willing to be able to dive into this and move along with however way you want to receive and perceive this object that you have. And so it's giving you, in a way, too, that power to be mindful. Um, So it's a two-in-one situation. I mean, you're getting that frequency, you're getting that vibration from this crystal, but you're also shifting your mind to being more mindful. And so I think that's huge, because it shows the power that our brain has, our mentality has, to be able to switch, and to be able to switch that mind path of going one route all of our lives to then switching it, um, because it is possible. And so that's kind of what we're doing along the way when we're trying to bridge that gap in between, our parents and that generation, and the ones that are preceding us, and the ones that we're handing that torch onto. As we're walking down that path, we're making sure that we're being conscious and mindful of how we're handing down the torch. And so I think it's just important. And um, just a little bit about, once again, kind of the products and why I've chosen these products. And I think it's amazing that there are so many people out there as well that have the same thing and are starting to open up the same mentality within all of this.
I love that. I love that you said that you are really conscious about being eco-friendly in the way that you make your products. So does that mean that every candle is different?
Yes, essentially. So I only have like a handful amount of each vessel, essentially. So yeah, each one that I'm creating, and like for example, I have my ritual candles. So those are larger vessels. Those are in glass, usually, and they're bigger. And each one that I'm creating has a different intention. So not every single one is the same essentially. And so I'm also kind of looking into the herbs that I'm putting into each one. So creating um when I'm creating the divine, which has lavender and rose petals, I am creating it to bring calmness and peacefulness into your environment. And so it has a subtle rose and lavender smell. And those are the ingredients and the herbs that I also want to put into that candle to raise that intention higher. So I'm also putting in lavender and rose petals and chamomile as well. Um, so each one has those specific types of herbs that create that intention and makes it stronger.
That's amazing. Um, so if someone is like has never purchased a crystal before, I know you said that you usually say like rose quartz is the go-to candle that you recommend first, but how does someone go about um, thinking through what to purchase? Would you like walk them through like which one they would need?
Yeah, so they sometimes people kind of tell me like, "Oh, I'm actually looking for something that gives me X, Y, and Z, like that empowers me or gives me the confidence or gives me abundance." And so then I would walk them through, if you are seeking a crystal that gives you abundance, from the ones that I'm offering, I would recommend citron. If they say I'm looking for something a little bit more like for balance and tranquility, then I say, well, I have celestite. But I do walk them through the process that it's okay to not know and it's okay to start your journey with one of them. But I always tell them, like, stand in front of the little crystals that I have and feel them out and see which one is drawing your name. Because whichever one is drawing your name is probably the one that is meant for you. And so just kind of taking that time to think about what is it that I'm trying to gain from this crystal, right? So you're already kind of going into choosing a crystal with that intention in mind. What do I want from this? And once you choose, it's like, okay, this is what I'm going forward with, and this is what I'm setting my intention to. So it's almost as if that crystal is drawing your name. Same goes with the candles. Um, a lot of people kind of take a look at them, smell them, feel them out, and see, well, which one is drawing my name, right? Because each one has such a different approach to the way that I decided to dress it and to create it. So whichever one is calling your name is possibly the one that you were meant to have. And so, yeah, I mean, it starts somewhere, and sometimes we do need a little bit of guidance, and sometimes you yourself know what you need.
It's so interesting to think about because I'm like, even as you're talking, I'm being transported in my mind to when I was little. And I feel like kids are naturally drawn to the earth. They're drawn to like rocks and
Hmm.
things that are like shiny or like they feel good in their hands and they're always like touching um, things of the earth. And I remember being told not to get dirty. And so there was
Hmm.
at some point, like, I just stopped exploring the earth.
Hmm.
But I remember, like even when I travel to like Mexico, and when I go to Guanajuato, and we're always like going on the tour de las minas, and at the
Mm.
end there's like a shop, and you can like look at all the crystals and the different like minerals that are found in these mines, and I'm always so mesmerized by the colors, the textures, and I always like am drawn to like touch them and like hold different um, crystals in my hands. So it's interesting. Like at some points, I guess I was told not to get dirty and not to explore and not to like feel. And I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but um, it's like a natural instinct for kids to to explore that part of the earth, and at some point it might get lost in when you're growing up, but then like it's cool to like come back to it into adulthood and like explore it again.
Yes. I definitely resonate with that a lot actually because I myself had a very similar experience where we were told like, don't get dirty, like if you're going to be outside, don't stain your pants or don't get on the ground like that. And so it was a lot of no, no, no. And now like you said, it is time to start getting reconnected with yourself and Mother Earth because I mean, we're human. We are a part of this floating planet in the universe, right? We are connected to this universe somehow in some way. And so, even going outside and walking barefoot or touching a tree, having a plant in your home just connects you more to Mother Earth. And I think in a way, it just humbles us as humans. And I think that's what we all need sometimes, that just humbleness that needs to be created as we all are. And so it is nice to kind of get back into it. And it starts off small. Like, for example, I also kind of had a similar experience where I went to Belize this past summer. I was thankful that I was able to go. Um, and so we had gone to a cave, like a cueva, and inside they had created it was all like nature that made it, but it was all these beautiful crystals inside. And it's so scary because it's in for a minute it is scary, but then you're like, wow, this is so beautiful. Like this is all that was created by Mother Earth, and you're here and taking it all in, and you do feel like peace just being in there and taking it all in and understanding that this journey of reconnecting yourself with Mother Earth is starting and it's going forward. And so, yeah, I mean, we do live in the city, but we can still do a couple things here and there that promote that healthy relationship with the outside world.
For sure. I think especially we saw it during the pandemic. And I mean, I say it as if it's over. Like I understand that
Yeah,
it's
no.
still happening. Um and we still need to be safe and be aware of um, COVID-19. But I think we saw people like bringing more and more plants into their homes. And even
Mhm.
I like started my own plant collection, which I said that I would never do because I didn't know how to take care of plants, and the thing was that I just didn't have the time to research and like think about taking care of a plant until I stopped, and it was like I want I need this in my home. Like I need more of Mother Earth in my home. And I think a lot of people felt that. And we saw a growing number of plant buying, really. And it was really encouraging and like fun to connect with other people and to start gifting other people plants. And it's something so simple as like a little plant, but it could be like everything to somebody's mental well-being.
Mhm.
So yes,
Exactly.
I love that you talk about like reconnecting with Mother Earth. I think that's something that as a society we had forgotten, and like everything is so fast paced, and when we were forced to slow down, like that's what we naturally gravitated back towards. I'm curious how you balance a full-time job and like a side business, because I know that like having a business is a lot.
Ugh, I mean, I ask myself that question too. Like, how am I doing this? And everybody around me does like asks me the same question too. But I mean, I like my domestic violence role is essentially like a 9 to 5. And so then when I come back home, I dive into this specific thing because it brings me peace and because I'm creating something for someone and their home. And that's why sometimes I also do need to put a pause and to rest and put down my website for a little bit because I'm recharging and I don't want to give a product and give something to someone that is putting it in their home and in their sacred space if I'm not putting my full potential in there, if I'm not putting in that intention in it. So I like to take my time, first of all. Like, I definitely like to pace myself with whatever I am doing. I don't want to overwork myself or burn myself out because then that defeats the purpose of why I'm creating what I am creating. So like I said, I have the 9 to 5 and then I usually focus on my small business during my after hours. And there's always specific like 2, 3 hours that I do so where I think about what I'm going to put out in that following week or what needs to get done or shifting my energy for the next pop up, which I found my love for pop ups because I love meeting vendors who are also on the same page. And honestly, this whole small business community has been very supportive, and I never knew it existed, honestly. And it's something that opened the door once again for me to say, hey, there's actually a whole community out here that is doing what you're doing, and that is also Latinx, and they understand everything that you're going through and want to empower you. And I love that community, and I love being part of that. Um, so I do try to maintain that juggle between both, but once again, I definitely put my wellness first, and I will continue and do and go about both with that mentality. Um, and so that's kind of how I've been doing it, and I have a lot of support from family and friends, um, and my partner that has been great, that has helped me with pop-ups and will continue to do so. So I have an amazing support system as well who has continuously motivated me and pushed me, and my coworkers from my full-time job know that I have this small business and they are always just, empowering me and also supporting me as well. And so it's great to see that I have a great environment where I'm working at full time and still support what I do as my small business as well.
That's awesome. And yes, the small business community in Chicago is amazing. I love
Mhm.
being a part of that and seeing the growth that like as we pour into our business and we pour into each other,
Mhm.
like we just grow as a collective, and
Mhm.
it's so beautiful. um
Mhm.
is there any uh like are there any limiting beliefs or patterns that you've had to work through as a Latina in this field, and then also like as a small business owner?
I would say the biggest barrier that has ever existed, I think, is my own mentality. Definitely being scared of the unknown, and that has always been something that I've always tried to work through is and am actively working through, is just limiting my own beliefs and limiting my own set of mind. And so at the beginning, like, it was hard to break out of that shell, but once again, my support system helped me and encouraged me and said, "No, it's what you're doing is actually great, and it should be out there, and there should be a platform for that." Um, so I think it has to do with a lot of the fear of the unknown and myself and being that barrier for myself, but that same barrier is what drives me too, so it's like a weird, I don't know, like, oxymoron sometimes. My own barrier and my own thought mentality, I'm like, "No, like, I need to do this then." And so it's juggling both, but like I said, with therapy, I've been definitely putting my headspace into a better mentality where I'm giving myself that support and I'm giving myself that love that I need to be giving myself because I need it and everybody needs that for themselves.
Yes, they do. Even if they don't realize it, we all need to give ourselves space and grace um, to recharge and like refocus and put ourselves first. I feel um, like as a Latina, like I'm always putting everyone else first, or that's how we were taught to do. That's what we were taught to do. Um, but it's not actually serving us, and it's not serving anyone else if we're not okay mentally. Um, so that's great. Is there any uh, advice or encouragement that you would want to pass on to the next generation?
Yeah, I would say to just, take that first step into reaching out to whoever it may be about whatever situation it could be. And so when it comes down to the domestic violence, I would definitely encourage to look for those resources because they are there and there is a community out there that has gone through the same thing that you probably have. Um, and so I would say, like, just being vulnerable too, because with being vulnerable, there's a lot of growth that could happen and healing that could happen as well. Um, and I feel like that's where this kind of stemmed off from with my raw emotions and having to process them and being in a vulnerable position where I dove into something that just flourished. Um, with this domestic violence is something that is very hush hush, but now we're moving into a mentality where we want to have healthy relationships with everyone, with your friend, with your family member, with your partner, and that's the way it should be. But creating that conversation as well about the experiences and about what needs to happen and what needs to change, um, is what we should be kind of diving into. Um, and there's a lot of resources out there. It's just having to look for them. And sometimes those barriers are set there. Um, and that could limit us. But we were talking about it earlier, we have this powerful tool in our hands, and that's our phone. So having to also dive into that phone and look at the resources and advocate for ourselves is what we definitely need to do to just begin that journey.
Hmm. Yeah. Is there any specific website that people could like start off with if they are looking for more resources?
Yeah, I would say so. I definitely always encourage when it comes down to either mental health or domestic violence. There is the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. And so if you Google it, there is a phone number that is actually used for all across of Illinois. Um, and calling that hotline, they connect you with the resource that you may need, whether that's counseling, whether that's therapy, legal resources. Um, they're the ones that are like the main hub for domestic violence. Um, and even mental health. And so within a lot of these different organizations, that's just a door that needs to be open to kind of help you and share your story with someone so that way they can kind of move you along the process with connecting you to those resources that are available out there. Um, and I, for myself, I work with healthcare alternative systems. So that's a huge umbrella of services that they offer for the city of Chicago. Um, and for my specific program, that's domestic violence. So there's that as well. If anyone ever needs any information about that, we're located in Chicago and we have two locations, like on the south side and the north side of Chicago. And like I said, I want to be more transparent about what I do because I think it is something that we need to start talking about and addressing within our relationships and what a healthy relationship even entails. Um, so, that is where that domestic violence kind of section goes into. And then if anyone would like to find me on Instagram, my handle is holistic_healing_circle. And that's where I post all of my affirmations and my candles and my crystals and things of that sort.
Yes, if you are not following her on this page, Instagram page, you need to be following because you will get like daily encouragement, daily affirmations, and it's just really like nice to come across that while you're on social media. So yes, go follow her there. But thank you so much. This whole conversation has been really great to have and to bring to the listeners and to bring out into the world. I think this is just the start. These conversations are just the start of a bigger movement that I think is coming, and I hope to encourage other people to continue the conversations, even though they're hard. Um, but I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that you shared, the knowledge that you shared. I will include all the links in the show notes that you shared, and then also I include it in the at the end of this video. If you watch on YouTube, you can find all the links there. Um, but thank you so much. I really appreciate this time that you took to chat with me today.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you so much for your invitation and for holding space so that way I could share a little bit about myself and my business and who I am. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And I hope to, now that it's summer, hang out in person again. We'll have to meet up in Pilsen and get another coffee. So
Yes, yes, agreed.
all right, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
All right, bye.
Talking through mental health as we navigate the many issues that have had a negative impact on our lives is hard, but it's necessary for us to acknowledge it so that we can move towards a place of healing, restoration, and eventually generational change. I love how Vanessa encourages us to be mindful of focusing on positive, affirming messages, as well as connecting to the earth to ground and steady us as we do the healing work in our lives. Okay, amigos. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share, rate on Apple Podcasts, take a screenshot and post on Instagram at Elevating La Cultura, or send me a DM. You can also comment on our YouTube video if you're watching online. I always like to hear from people and how they resonate with the stories that I share. So, enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening, y nos vemos next week. Bye!